Andor's 11th episode further complicates things, but can they wrap up all these loose ends by next week? Hi y'all, Snarky J Cosplay here. The second to last episode of Andor is finally out on Disney Plus today, meaning that we're in for one hell of a finale next week. Episode 11 is yet another solid serving of drama espionage with a side of starship fights. This episode gets a rating of 9 out of 10 from me. While it definitely feels a little more rushed and packed than some of the previous episodes, it takes its time and builds tension where it needs it, and I gotta say, this episode takes the time to spotlight exactly what a badass Luthen is. Like last week, I'm not gonna recap every single bit of this episode either, but there are some really important things that I want to get into, so without further ado, let's get into it. From this point on, there will be spoilers for episode 11 of Andor. You've been warned. One of the major plot points in this episode that are likely to carry over into next week is the death of Cassian's adoptive mother, Marva. From some of the chatter in last week's episode, I, as I'm sure a lot of you guys, pretty much assumed that Marva was going to be dead before the end of the show. What I didn't expect, however, was another scene of what I'm calling the Star Wars body bag treatment, in which we get to see a literal person in a bag being wheeled out in front of mourners, friends, colleagues, fellow inmates, what have you. It's a pretty powerful moment though. On the one hand, this is our hero's mother, and we know that they were really close, and beyond that, we also know that he didn't get a chance to say goodbye. But on the other hand, pretty much the entire town of Ferrix comes to see her off, and her affairs are handled by a group called the Daughters of Ferrix. And this really shows us exactly how towns like these can and will come together in times of crisis, which this kind of cooperation usually spells bad news for the Empire, so we love to see it. I also want to mention how sad I felt for the droid in this episode. I think B2EMO is a really well-designed, really cute little droid. And I think he's easily one of the more compelling droids we've seen in Star Wars in recent years. K2SO in Rogue One was absolutely brilliant. A lot of us felt kind of attached to IG-11 in the first season of The Mandalorian. We obviously love R2-D2 and C-3PO, but I'm talking about recent droids. BB-8 in the sequel trilogy, to me anyways, is a useless little beach ball lacking all of the charm that R2-D2 brought in his beeps in the original trilogy. And let's face it, Leia's droid Lola in Kenobi was really just a plot to sell toys. So I really like how human and how compelling this stuttering little garbage can in Andor has become. And I felt terrible for him when he really didn't want to leave the home of his former master. In my opinion, one of the show's most consistently brilliant performances comes from Mon Mothma, and this episode proves it even more. So we left Mon Mothma last week wedged between a rock and a hard place. She's stuck between choosing her daughter's freedom and her future and the ability to hide those 400,000 credits she was moving around. Now we get a glimpse of her daughter Lita having this kind of weird Imperial Girl Scout looking meeting in their dining room, and both Mon Mothma and her cousin Vel are concerned about this. I'm not sure exactly what it is that's going on here, but to me it seems like Imperial Indoctrination, which apparently her daughter is all for. For somebody like Mon Mothma, who actively despises the Empire, this has to be torture. And after Mon and Vel discuss how much trouble Mon is in with this whole money situation, it seems more likely than ever that she's gonna take Davo Skulden up on that offer to probably marry off her daughter Lita to his son. In a way, it seems like it could be a help. If she's being indoctrinated by the Empire here and she goes to Chandrila with his son, she might be able to be saved and have a better future. But it still means that she's kind of selling out her kid in order to help the galaxy, but for the greater good, right? This episode does give us some other bits and pieces of other characters. We get bits of Cyril Karn being a royal pain in the ass. He's still trying to find Cassian, but now he's got the news that Cassian is likely to return to Ferrix. He really does not understand the meaning of just butt out, but maybe he gets that from his overbearing mother, who is infuriating every time she's on screen. This episode's real MVP award, though, goes to none other than Luthen, who has quickly become one of my favorite characters in like any Star Wars media. We get this incredibly intense scene between Luthen and Saw Gerrera, in which Luthen actually has to reveal that he's actively willing to sell out one of their comrades, Anto Kreegyr, in order to maintain the position of somebody that he's got on the inside of the ISB, who we know is Lonnie. And of course, Saw Gerrera loses a ton of trust in him after he hears this, and it results in kind of this tense standoff. In a more poorly written show, Saw Gerrera might have overlooked this, he might have even agreed with it. But he brings up an important question and points out that it's likely that Luthen would do the same to him if the situation was different. Luthen claims that he wouldn't because Saw Gerrera actually knows him, while Anto Kreegyr apparently didn't. But in this tense, almost negotiation type scene, we get the exact number of men being sacrificed almost 2 or 3 times, 30 men plus Anto Kreegyr. It is a constant reminder of just how big the price of rebellion is, and it's also a reminder of how important it is that Luthen is willing to pay it. I gotta say, I especially love this one moment where Saw Gerrera finally agrees with Luthen. He's not gonna warn Anto Kreegyr, and he's gonna just continue to lie low. And Saw tells him that sacrificing Anto will be for the greater good. Luthen tells him, call it what you want, and Saw tells him, let's call it war. And I think that this is so important because I think that the whole rebellion thing throughout Star Wars media has had to be painted as this colorful series of battles that, you know, sell lunchboxes. But this is gritty. This is men being sent to die as their friends know exactly what's gonna happen to them because it's for the greater good. This is a war, and to me, all of these things come together to form a show that is so complex and so worth watching. It just goes to show you how willing and how desperate guys like Saw Gerrera and Luthen are to not only fight this war, but to do everything they can to win it. For the most part, what we've seen from Luthen is espionage, money moves, and that wig that he wears on Coruscant. But this episode really goes out of its way to prove what a complete badass he is. As he's making his way back to Coruscant after having met with Saw Gerrera, he's stopped by this Imperial ship, and they're scanning pretty much any ship in the area because they've seen partisan activity. So we already know that Dedra Meero and her people are really stirring up trouble just about everywhere. Even though Luthen is able to give them a fake Alderaan ship ID that does check out, they're still willing to give him a hard time, if even for practice. Again, is just another example of Imperial overreach and how willing they are to screw with citizens for literally no reason. Without anything warranting this plan of action, they decide that they're gonna board him. And here I am, thinking that he's gonna use diplomacy and his talking skills to work his way out of this. No, his Hallcraft is actually equipped with a tool that we've seen just a few times in the extended universe. It's this device that actually shoots out shrapnel. And if you shoot it into a tractor beam as it's going off, basically the tractor beam's own pull pulls the shrapnel in at a faster rate and destroys itself. And once he's used this beautiful, brilliant method to destroy this tractor beacon, they actually send out a bunch of TIE fighters. I'm thinking he's gonna have to run at this point. No, this dude goes into an all-out starship battle, blows up a bunch of them with precision that is rarely seen in Star Wars. And not only does he do that, but at one point his ship does this spin move with these two things that look like lightsabers coming out of the side. He literally slices TIE fighters in half with lasers, jumps into light speed, and poof, is gone. It's one of the most riveting starfights we've seen in this entire show. Well, one of the only starfights we've seen in this show. While I do love the storytelling and the slow burn world building that they've been doing, I love the tension and the drama. I definitely think that for the Star Wars audience, for the Star Wars universe, they could have done with a few more of these starfights throughout the series so far, especially because it's very clear they have the budget for it with how well done this one is. But anyway, it was just a brilliant scene. If you're not watching this show and you're just watching my reviews, please go watch this scene at least. It's so worth it. Now, our hero Cassian and his companion Melshi actually managed to make it off Narkina in this episode. And they only get off the planet with the help of these two aliens that they meet on the shore of a lake there. One of these aliens actually is not a stranger though. His name is Sisyed Ak, and in Rogue One, he's actually one of Saw Gerrera's partisan companions. His hatred of the Empire has already started here, and it's the only reason why he helps our friendly neighborhood escaped prisoners off-planet in this episode. Cassian requests a ride back to Niamos, and initially I'm sort of confused as to why he's going back to this beach town planet. He goes back to the hotel room that he had stayed in with that girl previously, and he's still hiding his box in the bathroom, so he manages to get a hold of some of his credits and 2 blasters, one of which he gives to Melshi before the two decide to part ways, because Melshi thinks it's super important that somebody finds out what it is that's going on in these prisons. And I think that that is incredibly important, because you look at the injustice of the Imperial prison system. Think of it this way. You go to prison, you do your time, and you get let out. But what if when you do your time and you get let out, they just send you to a different prison to do a different amount of time, and they just keep transferring you around forever until you die? Plus the whole time they're using you for slave labor. And that's what's going on here, and nobody knows because these prisoners are trapped in this system and they're not able to get this information out. While on Niamos, not only does Cassian get a hold of that box, but he actually manages to communicate with his friend Zan on Ferrix. Of course, Zan gives him the news about his mother, which Cassian actually doesn't repeat to Melshi. There are 2 things I want to bring up in regards to this transmission between Zan and Cassian. The first is that Zan calls him Cass or Cassian like 3 separate times in this conversation, meaning that if anybody's listening, they already know that Cassian Andor is aware of his mother's death and is likely gonna show up to that funeral. And of course, it's not like Cyril Karn, Dedra Meero, and Vel all have a vested interest in capturing Cassian, so it's possible that next week's episode will provide the burial of the century. The second thing I want to note here, though, is how the episode closes out. After Cassian's spoken with Zan, he goes and stands on the shoreline and just watches the waves for a minute. And he's obviously processing the news that he just got about his mother, and he's also likely thinking about the rebellion, because while he was on the phone with Zan, he told him to tell his mother that she would be proud of him, and now she's gone and not able to see everything that he's doing for this cause. This reminded me a whole lot of a similar scene of Cassian looking out at the waves on Scarif in Rogue One. We can assume that in Rogue One, he was also thinking of Marva in this moment, which makes Cassian Andor's character development arc from local sleazeball scamming his way through the galaxy to hero of the rebellion that much more powerful. This episode and everything in it, in my opinion, is just another example of how great quality writing can make a show. Y'all can call it Andor all you want. It's not clever. Everybody's been copying and pasting it in my comments section. This show is solid. That's all from me. I've been Snarky J. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on episode 11 of Andor in the comments below.